It is said that regardless of the religion you profess, your spiritual guide should inspire you with trust, love for others, respect and security, that with their wisdom they will lead you on the path of virtue, although this does not apply to some of them who, immersed in carnal desire and twisted thoughts, tend to only pretend. Today, I will tell you the story of Irene Garza, an inspiring woman who ended her days in the course of a canal at the hands of a sinful priest. In 1934, Irene Garza was born, sister of Josie and daughter of Nicholas and Josefina. This family of Mexican immigrants was living the American dream and had settled in Hidalgo County, Texas. To make a living, the parents set up a laundry business. I'm not talking about money laundering, but a laundry business itself. They worked very hard to support their two little ones. Over time, this business would not only provide for the family, but also economic stability. They sought so much, and so everything improved, and they were able to move to a more privileged area, south of McAllen. At this point, Irene was just a teenager. The young woman was known for being beautiful, respectful, devout, and kind. In short, a family girl. She won the affection of the entire town. It is known that from a young age she was passionate about beauty pageants and therefore participated in some. At the age of 23, this in the year of 51, Irene was chosen as the beauty queen of South Texas, as well as the queen of her university. This caused great popularity for Irene. So many boys were interested in her, as well as women admired her, but at the same time envied her. She had a charming combination of beauty and intelligence, and in her short life, she gathered a collection of achievements and firsts. She was the first Hispanic majorette in a majority high school. She was the first Anglo-Saxon near the Texas and Mexico border, and the first in her family to go to college. What I just told you was highlighted by the New York Times. The then queen graduated from university to become a second-grade teacher at a public elementary school. She was so kind and often used her salary to buy materials for children who couldn't afford them out of solidarity. Irene loved her job. She loved teaching the community's children. She was also part of a Catholic group called the Legion of Mary, which she attended daily without forgetting to take communion. On the other hand, she had two boyfriends. The first one was very religious like her, but those who knew her noticed that she was not so in love with him. Then she met a guy who had a bad reputation, as he was not religious at all and was a bit, let's say, off the rails. Irene fell in love with him. After a while, they broke up, as the guy asked her for the little treasure, the proof of love, which Irene did not accept due to her strong belief in remaining a virgin until marriage. Irene had all the means to move to the big city, as is common in the United States. However, at 25 years old, she still lived with her parents. Garza said she preferred to serve her community rather than go far away. Nicholas and Josephine were filled with pride and joy for having such a good daughter, and this is the part of the story where the strong and at the same time sad part comes. It was the year 1960 in Catholic time, Holy Week. On that April 16th, as a fervent religious woman, Irene told her parents that she would stop by the Sacred Heart Church to listen to the evening mass. In addition, she would take some time to confess. That rainy afternoon, the young woman left the house wearing a skirt. Her brown ankle-length skirt had light blue flowers and green leaves. She wore a pleated blouse, her black leather purse, and white shoes with heels and perforated uppers. As the hours passed, night fell and Irene had not returned home. Josefina assumed that the young woman had stayed for the Easter vigil and reassured Nicholas, the father. The night quickly turned into dawn, and it was already 3 in the morning, and the Garza family noticed that their daughter was not in charge. The police's arrival at the house was surprising, given the young woman's unusual late hours. Scared by the events, they did not hesitate to go to the McAllen police station to report Irene's disappearance. And at this point is where the desperation and anguish unleashed As in these cases, the police always have to follow a protocol, as they have to rule out that the disappearance is not a voluntary escape. Although for those close to the young woman, this was a way to despair. A completely absurd idea, as the teacher would be incapable of leaving in that way. She had a very active life in the community because of her work in teaching, apart from volunteering with the Legion of Mary, among other social commitments as a result of her beauty reign. Things in themselves were not going well at all. The most popular woman in the county had disappeared and no one knew her whereabouts. It seemed like the earth had swallowed her up. The search would begin the next day. The police asked the residents if anyone had seen the girl. Irene was not unnoticed, and was seen by some parishioners at the church around 7 in the evening. However, the last person to see her alive was the 27-year-old priest, John Bernard Fite, who at that time served as the temporary pastor of that church. But he claimed to know nothing about her. Dozens of volunteers joined the official search. By the afternoon of April 18th, a shoe identical to the ones Irene was wearing on the day of her disappearance was found on a road filled with rocks and mud. A few meters away was also the black leather wallet she had left home with that day. And all this pointed to her having been in that place, but it was not known why and for what. This was the great mystery. The situation quickly escalated. Darkness was falling for the Garza family. Receiving the news that they had found their daughter's belongings on a dirt road was not at all comforting. In McAllen, being a border town, it was starting to be said that the young woman had been kidnapped and taken to Mexico for white slavery, or even for illegal organ trafficking. The news of the beautiful young woman who had disappeared grew. The McAllen police began to surround the border crossings to rule out that she was taken out of the country. Even her search extended to some towns in Mexico, something that had never been done before. The community was becoming increasingly distraught, and uncertainty was growing. On the other hand, the family began to receive false leads. On one occasion, a person contacted by phone pretending to be Irene. They told Josefina that she had been kidnapped and taken to Mexico. Also, a man appeared saying that he had been crazy. He had taken her life and buried her. But it was discovered that the person declared in a state of drunkenness and made up the whole story. As the days went by, the situation was becoming increasingly untenable. The police no longer knew where to look or what to do. The maneuvers were not yielding positive results, and it was very difficult for the family not knowing Irene's whereabouts. Already on April 21 of that year, a young man named Arnold was walking along the edge of a canal not far from the town, when he suddenly noticed something in the distance. Distraught, he reported to the police. At first I thought it was a floating sack. Then I realized it was the corpse of a girl. The man had found Irene's body that sunny Thursday. She was wearing that floral outfit. No, there was no doubt about it. It had to be Irene. Her mother went into shock when she found out about the discovery. The forensic investigations only, unfortunately, confirmed the inevitable and brought dramatic news. The most beautiful young woman in the county had been murdered. The detectives immediately noticed that her blouse was unbuttoned and that her underwear was missing under her skirt. But I'll explain this to you right now. The police ended the life of a beautiful 25-year-old girl. He approached the jail, and the police approached the jail. At the place where the body was found, 2 candlesticks and a rope were also found, objects that were evaluated as a weapon since the autopsy determined that she had died from asphyxiation and from strong blows to the head caused by these candlesticks. Sadly, as I mentioned, she was victimized by the police. The experts in charge of the case said that the way she had died was quite painful and at the same time cruel. However, one of the circumstances that hindered the search for the culprit was the water where they found her. This then disappeared any kind of evidence that there could have been that could give any indication of who was responsible for the atrocity. The police, in the same way, did not give up. They continued in the search for some new clue, and they found it. In the bed of the canal where they had located Irene was a green device. It was a slide viewer. But here the question was what connection it would have with the crime scene. The investigators requested information from the inhabitants, and they communicated it to the press, and when they least imagined, they received a letter from the police, a handwritten letter, where they claimed to be the owner of this object, and the one who signed this letter was none other than the priest John Fite himself. The above was therefore so disconcerting for everyone because the priest, a person who in theory should help others and set an example, the priest was obviously under scrutiny and was questioned on several occasions. Surprisingly, it wasn't the priest, but he himself, who caused suspicion by giving varying accounts each time he was questioned. He said he hadn't confessed her, then he had, then he hadn't, and so on. O'Brien, another priest who supported the same church, declared having observed several wounds and tears on Fite's body after the young woman's disappearance, to which John claimed to be caused by climbing the fence of his apartment, as he had forgotten the keys to enter the church those days. Priest. The reasons were inconsistent because how was it possible that those wounds were exposed on the outside of his arm, when they should be on the inside? This left a lot to think about, but nothing could be proven. The parish priest was released. For his final statement, the cleric confirmed having confessed her from the rectory, but after that he said he knew nothing more about her. Despite so many changes in this individual's statements, nothing could be done, as at that time the church had a very important weight, both socially and politically. Seeing one of their own involved in this case was not convenient publicity, which resulted in doubt. Could there perhaps be a pact of silence? 2 weeks passed without progress in this case, when the police received a complaint. It turns out that a 20-year-old girl, a student, reported being attacked by a priest very similar to Fite. Maria America Guerra said she was surprised from behind in a church near McAllen. This girl's mouth was covered with a handkerchief and she was thrown to the ground. But such was the girl's skill that she managed to bite her attacker hard, so much so that the attacker bled, and she took advantage of this movement to run away. This happened about 20 days before the murder of Irene. The officers showed the young woman some pictures of men, and among them was Fite's, and Maria did not hesitate to point him out. Once again, the priest was called to testify and denied the accusations. In August, Fite was arrested on charges of attempted rape, and in 1961, he was brought to trial. Fortunately for him, the prosecutor said he had very little evidence to convict him. The man eventually pleaded guilty after making a deal with the prosecution to avoid being put on trial for a second time. Back in '62, he was found guilty of a minor offense, aggravated assault, fined only $500 and released. The priests, I repeat to you, were untouchable by justice in those old days. During the trials, Fite was transferred to a monastery in Missouri and then moved to a convent in New Mexico. The priest hung up his robes in the year 1970 and settled in Phoenix, Arizona, starting a family. Thus, Irene's case seemed to find no justice, and, as time went by, the girl's parents ended up passing away, and the hope of seeing the perpetrator behind bars was becoming increasingly difficult. Hopelessly, the case ended up going cold. But, as they say, hope is the last thing to die, and Irene Garza would not be the name on a forgotten folder in the drawer of unsolved cases. So, 40 years later, in 2002, the McAllen police chief Victor Rodriguez would reopen the case, now assigning Rudy Jaramillo to the new investigation. Later on, the police would find an important piece to advance the investigation, as the monk Dodd Tashini from Oklahoma wrote to them to reveal details of a crime. The story of a young priest who was entrusted to advise during Easter of 1960. Dodd revealed that, unable to bear the guilt of carrying that silence due to Fite's confession, after so many years he had to say everything that this priest had told him. And this was one of Fite's words to the monk. After confessing her, I forcibly took her to the basement, a place isolated by thick walls. Her screams could not be heard outside. She scratched me and screamed for help, but it was in vain. I tied her up completely, touched her, and made her mine. Then I went on to confess to the other parishioners. After completing my tasks, I escorted Irene to the parish house. There, I put her in the bathtub and wrapped her head in a leaf. After completing my tasks, I took Irene to the parish house, placed her in the bathtub with a leaf around her head, despite her desperate pleas for help, and then shut the door. When I returned, she was dead. The monk aside commented that, after that, fate declared to throw Irene's body into a canal. The police corroborated the monk's version with that of Father Joseph O'Brien, who at that time testified to having seen the tears in the killer's skin. They would now confirm that fate confessed to having killed Irene and thrown her into a canal. A new trial was already underway. Linda de la Vigna, Irene's cousin, and the two witnesses finally promised light in so much darkness. But, again a but, unfortunately the issues of power and church were still relevant. Well, prosecutor René Guerra invalidated the statements of the two religious men, arguing that O'Brien was suffering from dementia, and, with this, he managed to get the jury to once again grant fate freedom. All of this in the year 2004. Then later, more recently, in 2015, the investigation returned to the media thanks to the new prosecutor Ricardo Rodriguez, who, before being named Garcia's successor, promised the Guerra family to push the investigation. In February 2016, the 83-year-old priest was arrested, this being just the beginning to finally see him behind bars. A bail of $750,000 was set. The prosecutor argued to the jury that this man was a wolf in sheep's clothing. The trial began in the year 2017. 57 years after the crime, new key parties were called to testify to tie up loose ends. Beatriz Garcia, a girl with the same characteristics as Irene, who days before O'Brien's murder went to the jailhouse, assured that Fite harassed her from his car while she was walking. He asked her to pose for pictures in black at the cemetery. Then, Anna Maria Hollingworth, a friend of Irene, confirmed that on one occasion the murder victim told her that Father Fite had tried to take her to confess at the parish house. That's why she thought that Fite had had enough time to plan the crime. And it was then that on December 7th of 2008 already, 85 years old, the former parish priest John Bernardo Fite was found guilty of the murder of Irene and sentenced to life imprisonment. This individual, who had gotten away with it for so long, after 2 years in prison, appealed his sentence. But Fite died in February 2020, at the age of 87 after suffering a heart attack. Undoubtedly, this real-life character knew how to take full advantage of the beauties of his puzzle, as he was covered up by the church and political figures in his community all the time. Although, in the end, who is going to defend him from divine justice, or in other words, from karma? If you enjoyed this, you'll likely enjoy that. And I've also already posted it on Facebook. And well, see you in the next mystery.